Today we're going to be watching a video called Atheist Challenges Sam Shamoun and then Accepts Christ Live on Air. It was apparently a live debate, and obviously it had a very interesting outcome. So let's check it out and see what the hell happened here.
People put a lot of faith, obviously, into, uh, you ask someone who's religious, how do you know this is true? They
Just
just
like you're
believe,
putting
right?
faith in your intellect. You have made your intellect your own God. So you have more faith in your intellect and you've made your own intellect your own God. So you're just as guilty as these other people.
I agree. And
Imagine being an atheist and agreeing with such a ridiculous statement. There is a big difference between having faith in a God and understanding things via evidence, reason, and logic. They are very different things. Reason, evidence, and logic does not require our belief. It does not require our faith because it just works. It's not replacing God at all. It has nothing to do with the question of God. You are not making yourself your own God in this way, although obviously the Bible disagrees, considering it says, lean not on your own understanding. Now, why does it say that, you might ask? Well, my answer is simple. The Bible does not want you to think, because if you think, you're going to realize this whole thing is kind of silly.
I
Or at
think
least you agree. So then
no, I do
you've
agree. I do
replaced
agree with
one
you.
God for another God, and it's the God of your mind. In other words, your own intellect is your own God because that
Yeah.
governs to you what is true. So
So
you made
so
the
so
standard, right?
so how yeah, so how can I break that? How can I have more faith
I
in
mean,
So I find it very strange that an atheist would be saying, so how do I break that grasp of reason and logic? How do I break this grip that these things have on my mind? Why would you want to? Why would you think that was necessary? Why would you think that was a good thing? Why would you want to believe things without evidence? That makes me think to an extent that this is something of a setup, because I do not buy at all that an atheist would think in this way if this atheist is in any way skeptical or, based in reason and logic. It's very absurd, isn't it?
I don't have a magic solution to tell you how
Oh
to
no, I know, but I'm just, I'm here for
keep
advice.
studying,
Yeah.
keep studying, keep researching, keep looking at the evidence for the historicity of the Christian faith, the evidence for the historicity of Jesus and his crucifixion and burial, because
Yeah.
even atheists
Hold on 1 second here. Didn't he just say that evidence is bad, that reason and logic is bad, and that this problem that this man, this atheist, has is that he's replaced God with things like wanting evidence and using reason and logic? Didn't he say that a second ago? But here he is saying, okay, so what you need to do is you need to get some evidence and use some reason and some logic to find out the truth of Christianity. Isn't this kind of like, doing exactly what he was saying was the problem just a second ago?
scholars
Mhm.
who are not radical leftist mythicists who will tell
Mm.
you, yes, the historical Jesus existed, and yes, his followers
Okay, just for the record, there aren't many mythicists out there in biblical scholarship across the board, from the most rabid fundamentalists to the average atheist scholar. Most scholars fully accept the historicity of Jesus. But that is not enough. I mean, we also accept, or the historicity, I guess you could say, we also accept that Mohammed was an actual person. But the question is, was he a prophet? The answer in the case of Mohammed, and of course Jesus, is, well, no. But, I mean, if you're going to say Jesus rose from the dead, that's a pretty lofty claim. Why not also accept the claim that Mohammed performed the miracle of splitting the moon in half? If you're going to say, well, Jesus had witnesses who wrote it down, well, so did Mohammed. So what's the difference exactly? Which one of you do I believe?
exist. We have evidence, if we're going to do serious history, to show that. So we
Right.
know as a fact that Jesus was killed by crucifixion. We also know as a fact that his own followers were convinced that they saw him alive physically and that he was alive in heaven physically, and that started the Christian movement. So
We know that people believe a lot of very strange things. Think about Mormons. Not only do Mormons believe very strange things, they have lists of witnesses who claim to have observed these very strange things happening. And, it goes well beyond that in the case of Mormonism, and I suspect most other religions also. So, merely having witnesses to these things who believe very strongly in them is not evidence for Christianity any more than it's evidence for any other religion, which includes, obviously, Mormonism.
keep studying the
Yeah.
historical evidence for the birth of Christianity.
I have my own experience.
With
When I
what?
was reading, well, when I was reading the Bible, when I read the first 10 pages of it. I only got it recently. I read the first 10 pages. I
Yeah,
started at
what was your
Genesis.
experience?
Well, it was quite an interesting one, something I've never had. I start after finishing just 10 pages. I was starting to tear up in my
Good.
eyes, and I
Praise
didn't.
God.
I've never read anything, and it's made me upset like that. And it wasn't.
Okay, so I am pretty convinced at this point that this is a bit. I've never read anything that made me tear up before. That's a little bit much. But yes, there are beautiful things in the Bible, and there are things in the Bible capable of making a person tear up, and terrible things in the Bible that are capable of making a person tear up if you're an emotional enough person and read into the true gravity of a lot of these situations, like the genocide of the Canaanites or the whole global flood narrative. Plenty of things in the Bible can make a person cry. However, I must note that people have these spiritual experiences with every religious book, lots of religious icons from across the board. There is a YouTube video called Spiritual Witnesses where people describe their conversions to various religions. It's always the same sort of story. It's always, well, I felt a pull to this religion. It made me feel something. I cried, this sort of thing. And of course, they can't all be true, but yet they're all describing the same experiences. That's kind of a problem, isn't it?
Like it was a sad thing. It just this is what I didn't understand. It just made me upset. So because of where I came from, I guess now you said I was kind of religious towards my own intellect, but um, and I don't mean this in a rude way, and I don't want to offend you or anyone here. But
Oh,
when you don't believe in, I guess Jesus or God for a long time, and you grow up with all this kind of technology around you, like I did, and I wasn't introduced to the Bible from a young age. When you read some of the things that happen, or you hear, like you, for example, you talk about things that happen, stories in the Bible. It's hard to believe it in a way, and I hope you don't take that the wrong way
because
because
you
it's
Yeah, it is hard to believe things like talking donkeys and burning bushes that also talked, and all sorts of things like the Ophanim, which are like angels that are wheels revolving around one another that have eyes all over them that say, "Be not afraid." Yeah, it is kind of hard to believe stuff like that because, that sort of thing doesn't happen in the real world. As far as we can tell, nothing supernatural has ever been proven to happen. As far as we can tell, it's just a natural world all the way down, baby.
have already
I've
assumed from your
mhm,
frame of reference,
yeah.
from your experience, well, these things are not possible because I haven't experienced them. So who's the standard again of what can and cannot happen?
I guess the standard is me again.
You again.
So there's the problem.
Unless you are God and all knowing and
Hmm.
have perfect knowledge of past, not just the present, how do you know what can and cannot take place and what
Yeah.
is and what isn't possible? How do you know?
Well, here's the thing. I don't have 100% knowledge of what is possible and what is impossible. I just don't have that, and frankly, nobody does. But we do have, like, reasons to believe certain things in this world. For example, evolution has just enormous amounts of evidence. The Big Bang has enormous amounts of evidence. You could say we believe in these things, I guess, but if we are, it's because we have evidence. If you're making an assertion without evidence, there's every reason to question that assertion, and when it comes to biblical narratives or religious narratives in general, you are asserting a lot of very heavy things with a very small, minuscule, tiny amount of evidence. And that's a problem. That's not me saying I know everything. That's not me saying I have a great grasp on what is possible and impossible. Sure, God could exist, whatever. But what I am saying is, I need some evidence. We need to be seen, or we need to be seeing some evidence. But yet, of course, there is none. That's all we need. We just need some evidence. Do you have evidence you can present to us? Yes or no? If you do, show it. If you don't, then I have no reason to listen to your claims over the claims of anybody else also lacking evidence. That is not a statement on possibility. That is a statement on what your claim is.
This?
I don't,
Yeah.
but I see your point now.
So your problem is you've made yourself your own standard, your own idol, your own God. Well, that's too hard to believe. Why? Oh, because we don't experience. Well, that's why it's called a miracle. A miracle means it's not a repeated occurrence. If it was
Yeah.
a repeated occurrence, we wouldn't take it as a miracle.
Right. Okay.
So it comes
That
down
makes
to your
sense.
worldview, right?
Yeah.
So if you believe there's a personal creator God and that this creator
I'm not sure if I accept that definition of miracle. When I think of the miraculous, I think of things that can't just happen anyway. For example, let's say that I have cancer, as atheists are sometimes known to get. I mean, there are some atheists dying of cancer that have YouTube channels, but let's say I get cancer. It's very bad. It seems like it's terminal cancer, not very good at all for me. And I end up going to the doctor, getting some treatment, and the treatment isn't working. But then I go back to the doctor one time, and the cancer is gone. This is known to happen sometimes. Cancer does sometimes spontaneously seem to just go away entirely. Now, we have various explanations for that, such as viruses resulting in an immune response that also takes care of the cancer. I'm not sure to what extent this can happen. I imagine if cancer's gotten to a certain point, it's probably hopeless, but it does happen, at least to some extent. Maybe not to the extent in my example, but I digress. So it does happen. So if a Christian has this sort of thing happen where they have cancer, it's confirmed, then they come back and the cancer is gone after they were preyed upon, or preyed on, I should say. But preyed upon actually works pretty well in that case. You can't really say that that's necessarily a miracle because that is a thing that is known to happen to science and which we have potential explanations for. It is a thing that is being explained. However, there are specific cases where if something happened, we could say it is miraculous because we know it doesn't happen in this world. For example, let's say that I request a veteran come to my house, and I've got a bunch of devout fundamentalist Christians at my house waiting for him. I request they pray over him. They pray that his leg comes back, that his missing leg that he lost in the war grows back right in front of us. And it does. That right there, we have never known that to happen that I'm aware of. Now, there could be a scientific explanation. And if there is, I'm sure it will show up in gene testing or whatever. But I would say that in this particular case, it's pretty likely that was actually miraculous. And yet, those sorts of things never happen. That's a pretty big problem. As far as we can tell, the universe works as it should if there were no God. In fact, adding God to the mix only makes things confusing because it does add the problem of evil, the problem of divine hiddenness, those sorts of things. You're actually making things worse for yourself by adding God to the mix.
God can intervene in creation and do these miraculous feats, then what's the problem? The problem with you is that you see things that you take for granted and don't see how miraculous they are. Here, I'll give you an example. You see birth every day, right? So you take it for granted. It's nothing really out of the ordinary, miraculous.
Right, yeah, it happens all the time.
Okay, but let's now really break down that even what you think is something normal and natural is supernatural, because you're telling me from a sperm and an egg, when they come together, it creates a brand new life and a completely unique personality. And you don't see anything miraculous about that?
No, I don't see anything miraculous about that because we have explained that. We know how that works. There is no divine intervention at any point in this process. In fact, I mean, we can chart the evolution of these sorts of things back a very long time, and we have great ideas for how they arose in the first place. And as far as we can tell, there is no divine intervention. God is not coming down and putting a human in somebody. God is not coming down and planting a fetus in a woman after, sperm meets egg. That's not happening. Nothing like that is happening. God is not coming down and putting a unique personality in somebody. What's happening is, over time, that person is interacting with their environment, and through the interactions with their environment, they are changing. Their brain chemistry changes. They're becoming something. They're becoming something according to the conditions set by their own DNA and interactions with the outside world. This is not some divine mystery. This is not some miraculous occurrence. Now, I guess you could say it's miraculous in like the casual sense of just being like, wow, it's awesome, and like the actual meaning of the word awesome. However, what it is not is a miracle from God. We just don't see God involved at any part of this process, and we know there was no point at which God was involved in this process because we know we evolved from ape-like ancestors and they evolved from other forms of life and so on and so forth back a very long time. God was not involved in this process at all as far as we can tell.
I do, but it's
Do you have siblings?
yeah, I do. Yes, I do. Yeah.
So you came from the same father and mother?
Yes, I have one from the same
You
father.
have, so the one that you have from the same father and mother, you both came into being through the same act of sex, and yet why are you so completely different?
Well, because we have different sets of DNA, we have different sets of traits, we interact with our environments very differently. I mean, we are prone to doing things differently based on our DNA alone. And like let's say you take twins, for example. You take twins and you put them in the same environment. They might end up pretty similar people in a lot of respects, but because they are going to be still interacting with their environments in very different ways, they are going to have some pretty big differences. But if you take these twins and put one in another country entirely, they're going to end up very different because they're going to be interacting with very different environments. Now, in some ways, they will still be very similar because you can't escape DNA. You can't escape your genetics. But you can escape certain things like cultures and religions and philosophies. You can move to a society that has very different things, and that will change you entirely. This is not shocking. This is not surprising. There is no miracle to be found here. It's just how it works.
That sperm and that egg create a unique personality.
Yeah, I can't explain it.
They do not create a personality, they create a fetus. That fetus grows up into a personality, but that alone does not create the personality. There is no personality created at that moment. The personality evolves over time according to the instructions in DNA and then interactions with the outside world and the forces found within it.
I can't explain that to you, and I'm guessing there's
So
yeah.
here's a miracle taking place before your eyes, but because it's a natural occurrence, you don't think it's miraculous. See, this is the problem with your mindset. Even
Yeah.
that,
No, it's the problem with your mindset that you want to put God in everything you don't understand. That's called the God of the gaps. Although in this case, I'm not sure it's exactly the God of the gaps because I doubt he would argue that we don't understand how these things work. So it's not necessarily the God of the gaps. It's more like supplementation by God or something like that. That's a shitty name for it, but he's not arguing for the God of the gaps, but it's a very, very similar idea, isn't it? And it's a silly one. And, every time that they've made these God of the Gaps arguments, it has been wrong. We have always filled those gaps in our knowledge with the natural world and how it works. As far as we can tell, there is no God involved in any of these processes. Sorry, that's just how it works, my guy.
that which you take for granted, you see daily,
Yeah.
which you think is just part of the norm, it's just part of the natural realm, is actually supernatural because how the hell does a sperm and an egg create a unique life with a unique personality? And you and I can come from the same father and mother,
Mhm.
same active sex, and completely different.
Take some science classes, my guy. Go to school, learn some science, it'll blow your mind. The fact that you don't understand it doesn't make it miraculous or supernatural, that just means you don't understand it. As I always say to people of this type, try reading another book. There are other books out there. There's not just the one book, there's plenty of books, and you can read them and find out how these things work that you are so mystified and perplexed by.
And you don't
Yeah.
see that this is supernatural in and of itself.
Well, I do now. You've opened my eyes a lot actually. Now that
That's my
just
point.
You have to be kidding. There is no way this is legitimate, but I am interested in seeing where it goes because if it's not legitimate, the caller really has this guy going. If it is legitimate, how sad.
just this simple
You're
discussion
thinking.
has made me. Yeah, yeah.
Your thinking.
Okay.
Your thinking is such that, well, these things happen every day. And since someone being raised from the dead doesn't happen in today, it can't happen. Whereas a lot of what takes place in front of you is itself a miracle that you cannot explain. For
Yeah.
example, why is it you can breathe on planet Earth, but if you leave the atmosphere, you die?
The reason is simple, my guy. We humans evolved a long time ago, well before we were humans, in fact, to utilize oxygen because oxygen was prevalent on the Earth. Now, although it wasn't always, I must say that cyanobacteria played an important role in producing oxygen in the world. It wasn't always here. But of course, for life to survive, we had to learn how to use it. And the reason why we can't survive without it is because we evolved to use it. Again, not a mystery. Not a mystery in the slightest. But of course, people like this stuff he keeps saying, like, oh, it's all about how you see the world. You see the world in a natural way. Well, yes, we do, because natural explanations work. Supernatural ones just don't. They don't have any bearing on our reality as far as we can tell. But people like this, they see the world in a very warped way. They see the world as a place of magic and fairies and witches and wizards and unicorns and leviathans and demons and devils and angels. But there are none. They're not there.
There's
What
no.
is it about Earth? Because it's in space, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you leave the Earth and enter space, no oxygen, you die and you float away, right?
hmm
It's oxygen and gravity, and these things actually work together. The gravity helps keep the oxygen on the planet. In fact, um, what's the mystery?
Then what is it about Earth that's suspended in space that allows you to breathe and live when
Yeah.
it's mixed?
I can't answer that. It's
But you take that for granted because
What do you mean you can't answer that? What kind of an atheist is this exactly? Is this an atheist who never went through like third grade? Is this an atheist who has never been to school? Is this an atheist who's never read anything? You've never watched any videos about science? Is this an atheist who's just an atheist by coincidence? Just happened to like stumble upon, well, maybe there isn't a God. I guess I'm going to go with that for a while now. Like, what do you mean you don't know the answers to these? These are all very basic things here, right?
life
right.
gives you.
Yeah. Yeah. No. No. That. Yeah. No.
And by
That
the
makes a
way,
lot of sense.
you want modern proof that the dead can be raised? How many people you know clinically dead, heart stop, brain stop, and they're resuscitated?
Yeah. That does happen. Yeah.
So if it can happen today,
There is a big difference between medical technology, medical science, bringing back somebody who has died. I mean, when we talk about death, there's basically two different types of death. There's death in the sense that your heart stops and you start to experience brain death, but don't actually get there, because when you become brain dead, there is no coming back from that. And then there is death, which is you are gone. You have been dead longer than, let's say, 15 minutes. There is no more you at this point. After that, you cannot be brought back, and it's very likely you could never be brought back from that. And this is modern medical technology that allows you to bring back somebody when their heart has stopped, for example. When they stop breathing, when something goes terribly wrong, medical technology can bring them back from the precipice of death. But death, the part at which you have been gone for, 15 minutes plus, and your brain is gone. You can't come back from that. You can't come back from that. And certainly, that is not a miracle. That is science. That is the power of the very thing this man is dismissing in his arguments. And of course, it goes without saying that a zombie from the Middle East 2,000 years ago, it's not going to happen. Like, you can't. The way Jesus is brought back is he's dead for 3 days. Not just 15 minutes, 3 full days. And then he comes back to life as a zombie. The living dead, literally the living dead. And of course, he did that with other people too. Like, he had other people be dead for days at a time and then brought them back to life. That doesn't happen. That's not reality. That has nothing to do with what we do today, modern medical technology. It's very different. They're very different things.
Today, because we have the technology to do it, why would you then think that God cannot do that without technology?
See, and this is, I guess, this is where it comes back to my faith in God, right? And me trying to have myself as my
Exactly.
intellect as the standard. Yeah.
That's the point.
So
So what's
you've made you.
happening?
No, so yeah, like I said, I am serious about doing this.
You got to
Like,
change your mindset. That's what I'm
of
trying to
course,
show you. Change
of course, yeah.
your
Change your mindset. Believe in fantasy. That's the best advice you'll ever get, my dude. Just believe in magic and all that good stuff.
mindset. The problem is with your mindset, not the evidence, because Jesus stood in front of people who saw the miracles and they still rejected him. So it's not the evidence.
Or maybe, just maybe, the miracles didn't actually happen and weren't miraculous. Just a thought there. I mean, plenty of people claim to perform miracles. How many of those do we believe? And yet, how many people insist that they have seen miracles from these people? But of course, these miracles are never tested, and if they are ever tested, we find out they're not actually so miraculous. And now, obviously, it would have been a lot easier to fool people 2,000 years ago, wouldn't it?
It's your assumption, your mindset. Because if Jesus stood today in front of us and did the miracles that he did, let's just assume, because you still don't know if it's true or not, let's assume it's true. Jesus walked here, did miracles. If miracles in of themselves could produce faith, then how do you explain the fact there were people who saw the miracles and still had him killed and didn't believe?
Well, I guess.
Well, it is kind of suspicious, if you ask me, that the people who were most familiar with him, the Sanhedrin, I don't know if that's how you say that, but the Sanhedrin, they were the most familiar with Jesus, and they just weren't impressed by him. That is kind of suspicious, don't you think? If there was really a guy going around committing all of these crazy miracles, these crazy acts, you'd think the Sanhedrin would have been like, well, that's pretty impressive. But no, they were totally unimpressed by the guy, and so were the Romans, for that matter. Until, like, the later stories where, of course, Pontius Pilate is lionized and made into a good guy, so they shifted the blame entirely to the Jews because Gentiles were more receptive to the message. But there is no evidence that Jesus ever did these miracles that you're saying that he did. There's no evidence for this at all.
This is it. I mean, it's very easy. It's very easy to. I can understand now why people like me might not be able to believe it, especially since, like you said, there were people that saw it with their own eyes and didn't believe it.
That's my
So
point.
yeah,
It has
Let me just, point something out here. I have been to magic shows before. That is some good stuff. I saw Penn and Teller live back in 2009, and I am a very rational, skeptical person. So of course I was trying to figure out how it worked, how the trick worked. Sometimes I got it. Sometimes I just nailed it. Other times I was like, "What just happened? What is going on here?" And yes, they can be very impressive magicians, and they're probably actually not even fantastic magicians. They've just got a really good act. I've seen magicians do some really crazy stuff out on the streets of Manhattan. Do I think they're really performing magic? No, they're tricks. If Jesus went around the Middle East, I think the threshold, the standard for what is a miracle, what is a miraculous act, would have been a whole hell of a lot lower. I mean, we had people back then. It was something like what, 5% of the population of the Roman Empire was literate, probably lower in the area of modern-day Israel at that time. And I mean, think about it like this. In the 1830s, when the Book of Mormon was formed by Joseph Smith, who was just like straight up lying about everything, something like 90% of the population was literate, and yet people still believed it en masse. And not only that, despite all of the first-hand records we have of Joseph Smith's chicanery, you still have people, millions of people in Utah and well beyond its borders, believing fully in Mormonism, even after they hear all the weird stuff about it. They'll still say, well, he experienced miracles. No proof. If you can convince people that easy, now, in the modern era, imagine how easy it was back then.
Nothing to do with evidence, because you can witness a miracle and still explain it away and still find a way not to believe. That's what they did. So this is my point.
If there is evidence that something isn't actually miraculous, yes, you can explain it away as something that isn't actually miraculous. What's so bad about that? If Jesus was going around performing the 30 AD version of like Penn and Teller, then yeah, I mean, it's perfectly reasonable to say he was doing that. I mean, if anything, if he really did any kind of miracles, I'd say that's what was happening. That's probably why the Sanhedrin was unimpressed. They're like, okay, he's not a miracle worker. He's just taking people for a ride. They were probably smart enough to realize it. A lot of people weren't. I mean, think about the people that Jesus attracted mostly. He didn't attract the educated classes. He was attracting like the common man. You know, rubes.
Your problem is not the evidence. Your problem is you, your mind.
A closed mind. Closed-minded at the
That's
moment.
it.
But
So
yeah.
when you change your mind and it'll be open, then you'll see how clear and irrefutable God's existence is. Because
So yeah, Christians are the definition of open-minded. Yeah, there's nobody more open-minded than a Christian. Am I right, my guys? Am I right, my dudes, my ladies, my non-binary pals out there? Am I right?
your existence is proof of God's existence. Your conception is proof of God's existence. Because again, just the miracle of life, how do you explain it naturally? That a sperm
Science. You explain it with science, and we have really good explanations for it. Again, take a class on this. Take a whole course on it. Just, get a medical degree. It's not complicated stuff, my guy.
and an egg comes together. You and I, let's say we have the same parents, but we came out differently. How is that? How do you explain that act of sex producing a brand new human life with a unique personality? Even scientists will tell you that the Earth's positioning from the sun is at a perfect distance, 93 million miles, right?
No. We're not going down that road. Let's talk about that for a second, because this is an area where I have a great deal of knowledge, actually. We are, in fact, in the habitable zone of our star. That is true. But the habitable zone is actually a fairly wide area, and 93 million miles is only an average. We get closer and we get further away. However, we have been discovering exoplanets, which is planets outside our solar system, for a while now. We have discovered something like almost 6,000 exoplanets outside of our solar system. I mean, outside of our solar system goes without saying because they're exoplanets. And the results are, quite frankly, astounding. I mean, we have discovered that something like 10% of planets are in the habitable zones of their stars. Not only that, even more than that have water in some form or another, as far as we can tell, just based on what we see in this solar system, let alone what we see in other solar systems. I mean, not solar systems, I mean, they're stellar systems, star systems. We have detected water, or I mean, the signs of water, on multiple worlds outside of our own solar system, and what we found is water seems to be abundant in the cosmos. The ingredients for life, water, carbon, amino acids, you find them everywhere you look. Habitable zone planets. Again, about something like 10% of all planets, maybe lower than that now, maybe like 1%, but somewhere between like 1 and 10% of all planets are in the habitable zones of their star. If it's only 1%, we have something like 1 trillion planets in our galaxy, maybe even more, maybe like 2 trillion planets in our galaxy. That's a lot of planets. Let's assume that the number of planets in the habitable zones of their stars are about 1%. What's 1% of 1 trillion? It's a pretty big number, isn't it? It's like 10 billion. 10 billion planets in the habitable zones of their star. Now, the fact that, like, it seems so perfect that we are in this position we are just means we got lucky. But, I mean, a lot of people are going to get lucky if you have that many planets in the habitable zones of their stars. And that's just in the one galaxy. You know how many galaxies there are in the observable universe? There's something like 1 trillion, maybe more, maybe 2 trillion. You know how many galaxies there are in the whole universe? Because the observable universe isn't all there is. The actual universe may be something like 255 or more times bigger than that. So 255 times let's say 2 trillion times 10 billion. That's an enormous number, isn't it? And that's the number of planets in the habitable zones of their stars. That's the lower end, the lower threshold. And the number is just enormous. But of course, Christians don't know this shit. They don't listen.
Yeah, I guess they would say that. Yeah.
Yeah, they would say that. They say
How-
any
how-
closer and the Earth would be burned up, right?
Yeah.
No. That's not how that works. Mercury is very hot, but has not been burned up. Venus is even hotter than that, as far as I'm aware. It's not burned up. It just has a very dense, thick atmosphere that just makes it a terrible place to be. But like again, 93 million miles is just an average. It is not where we are. It's not a fixed position. The Earth's orbit is more like oval shaped. I mean, not like a perfect oval, but it's more oval shaped than like circular. So no, in fact, we come closer to the sun and go further away from it. The habitable zone is actually a bit bigger than that.
Any further and the Earth would freeze up. Now, how do you explain the perfect positioning and placement of the Earth in relation to the sun, where it's not any closer and it would be 1 degree, it'd burn up, or closer, or 1 degree further, it would freeze up? Now, this is something you take advantage because the Earth exists and you live in it, but you never question how miraculous that is.
It's not really miraculous when we're talking about numbers that are so large. I know that we are very like human-centric, very Earth-centric, that we think about these things in our own terms. But as I have just done some math there, like very basic math, very, very simple math, it's easy to understand. We're talking 255 times 2 trillion times 10 billion. And that's the like lower threshold for the number of planets in a similar position to ours in their own star systems. Enormous number. So I think it's fair to say our being here, coincidental.
I don't really feel like I need evidence anymore because it's just this small conversation's kind of yeah. So what?
Now-
So what do I need to do? You know, I don't know too much about it. All I know is that hearing about Jesus and Christianity it kind of brought warmth. It made me feel warm and like welcomed, even though it wasn't about me. Of course, you know, it was just stuff that I'm watching. How do I guess, become a proper Christian?
Okay, well, now you're asking me to become a Christian. Now, I gave you a link in the private chat. That's Expedition Bible. I'll walk you through this. So you are telling me you feel now your heart is open and you're not just saying it as an emotional response that Jesus is Lord and that he has been raised from the dead?
Yeah, it's from the heart.
So let's confess.
How do you know that quickly? Again, I do think that like this supposed atheist caller was taking this guy for a ride. He did a very good job of taking this guy for a ride and sort of like exposed this guy as a just completely ignorant person, completely uncurious person. But let's see how the conversion goes, because I am kind of curious, like, to see if like there's anything at the very end where this guy kind of maybe reveals, just not entirely like openly, just says like, oh, by the way, I'm just fucking with you, but like where he actually like reveals himself in some way or another, like some keyword or something. Let's see.
I confess
I confess
Jesus Christ is Lord.
Jesus Christ is Lord.
He is Yahweh
He is Yahweh
who became flesh
who became flesh
from the Virgin.
from the Virgin.
I confess
I confess
Jesus died for my sins
Jesus died for my sins
so that I could live.
so that I could live.
And I confess
And I confess
God the Father raised him back from the dead.
God the Father raised him back from the dead.
And I confess
And I confess
Do you really have to say all of this stuff? Like, what denomination is this here? Do you really have to say all of these things? I don't get it.
Jesus is alive in his body of flesh,
Jesus is alive in his body of flesh,
and he will return.
and he will return.
And I give Jesus my life.
And I give Jesus my life.
Lord Jesus,
Lord Jesus.
Oh my God, it just keeps going and going. What is this prayer? Just say the sinner's prayer. It's much easier than this. And like, I mean, you don't have to understand the whole theology of like Christianity to be a believer, do you? But like, they're really going through it, aren't they? Jesus Christ.
you are my Lord
You are my Lord
and my Savior.
and my Saviour.
Have your way with me.
Have your way with me.
Have your way with me, oh Lord. Wow. I guess this guy's ignorant of a lot of things, actually.
Amen.
I love you, brother. I will contact you later about getting baptized, all right?
Yeah, thank you very much for...
Thank Jesus.
Yeah.
He brought you
Oh,
to the
yeah.
right place to smack you around a little bit tough.
Okay, so that was fascinating. I love just the sheer confidence this guy has in saying complete nonsense. Just fascinating stuff. Really great. Very fantastic. I also feel like, okay, so you can't really see this very clearly probably, but look right there. Wait. I got to get around my thing. Look right up there, above where my finger is. So, Muslim cries and accepts Jesus as Lord after leaving Islam. Female ex-Muslim in tears over the words of Jesus Christ. Check that out. So it seems like people calling in and converting is pretty common on this guy's channel, despite the fact that his arguments are, quite frankly, garbage tier. That makes me think maybe it's like a meme to call in and convert on this guy's channel. Maybe the whole channel is a meme. I certainly hope it is. I haven't done really research into it. Somebody just sent me this one. He's like, hey, cover this. So I am. But yeah, that was a wild ride, wasn't it? I remain unconvinced that the guy was actually like converting there. But I do remain convinced of exactly one thing, which is that Sam Shamoun is a moron. So thanks for that, Sam. Really cool stuff. And thank you for watching. I hope you have a good one.